Roger Desmond from the University of Hartford. He's speaking on fake news. It's growing, spreading, and threatening. And we thank the Friends of the Simsbury Public Library who make all our programs possible. So our speaker, Dr. Roger Desmond, received his PhD in communication research at the University of Iowa. At the University of Hartford, he teaches courses in media, communications, and journalism. And much of his research, published in journals and book chapters, has focused on children and the media. Dr. Desmond's been awarded fellowships at Yale, the University of Pennsylvania, and most recently, the American Society of Newspaper Editors. He's served as a consultant to numerous media organizations regarding news, entertainment, and public relations. And in 2015, he received the Roy Larson Award for Excellence in Teaching, the highest teaching award at the University of Hartford. So please welcome Dr. Desmond.
Oh boy, I sound really impressive there. That's more than I thought. But as she indicated in my introduction, it's a very nice introduction, I'm a lifelong student of communication, how people come to know things, what's the role of media in our lives, and it's been a wonderful life. It's one of my favorite cartoons, talking about relativity of truth, which we don't buy into, about fake news. But what is it? Everybody's charging everybody lately when they speak, and there's something that they don't like. They say, oh, that's fake news. What is that? Sometimes media people make mistakes and accidentally transmit news. That's not fake news. So in terms of definition, it's news that's reported somewhere in a periodical, on the web, television, that is deliberately designed to mislead. It's deliberate. It's counterfeit. Fake news is not an accident, I guess is what I want to say. And more in definition, a lot of people have, in the last couple of years, think that it's just politics. It's gone way beyond politics. If you look the world of entertainment, some of the people, figures in entertainment have been objects of fake news. So it's spread into all kinds of domains that matter. But in politics, I think that's what gets our most attention, because that's where it's the most dangerous, probably. So fake news is deliberate, it does damage, and it's not true. That's important. Probably self-evident. In the past 2 weeks, here's just an idea of some of the stories that we've seen that are fake. Here we go. It takes a minute to load. But this was a very important one because it was an attack on a newspaper, the Washington Post, that has a pretty good, pretty good reputation, I see. It doesn't want to go. It wants permission to go to the internet. And this is a fellow named James O'Keefe. James O'Keefe was the originator of the story, and he's a person who is known as a producer of fake news. He's produced a number of videos that have been altered, really easy to detect, and he's kind of an attacking gadfly. This was an anti-Washington Post plot to discredit some of the reporters there, one of the reporters in particular. And I don't know if you remember the story, but his organization is called Project Veritas, which is really ironic, because in Latin, veritas means truth, and he's not anything to do with truth. He sent a reporter into the Washington Post to say that she had been impregnated by James O'Keefe when she was 15 years old. And what's worse, because the election is being held as we speak in Alabama, is that she said Roy Moore encouraged her to have an abortion. And in Alabama, it might be okay. It might be okay to have a teenage girlfriend, but it's not okay to have abortions. They're a very anti-abortion kind of state. Excuse me, I'm just getting facile with this. Here we go. So in comes a reporter that says, this is what, a girl to the Washington Post that says, this is what was done to me by Moore. This is the woman that made the fake charge. This is the reporter at the Washington Post. It almost worked. In other words, what she wanted to do and what O'Keefe, her boss, wanted to do was to plant a story, this story about her being impregnated by Moore, and it would discredit the Washington Post, which would make some of the people happy that are opposed to some of its politics. Well, you couldn't see the video. But what's important is that in the attempt to discredit the Washington Post, she did a couple of things that tipped the reporter that this might not be on the up and up. One of the things she said is, do you think this story will do much damage to the campaign, to the war campaign? And that kind of, the reporter, and she said it several times, so that kind of triggered something. And then she kept saying she worked in a particular office for a particular person. They called the office, a reporter did, to verify her employment. They said, we've never heard of her. And the very next morning, they saw her enter O'Keefe's office, clearly indicating that she was in his hire, or at least she was, subject to his control. So it failed, and this time journalism worked. But it was one of the most blatant attempts to plant a fake story in the media that didn't work, thank goodness. There are stories that are planted in the media. You might remember this story. Anyone does? It's only a week old. President Trump tweeted a number of videos, short videos, showing the problems in the Islamic world. In this one, he shows clearly a Muslim cleric about to destroy a statue of the Virgin Mary. And in the video, she actually does. In this one, a Muslim supposedly attacked a Dutch boy who was on crutches and beat him really hard. And in this one, a Muslim pushes another Muslim as punishment off a large building and crashes, and he falls down and clearly to his death. The thing is, this is a woman named Jada France, and she's a British woman who specializes, like O'Keefe does, in planning fake stories. But what President Trump was trying to do here was show that we need to stop the Islamic world from entering our borders. This video is about 4 years old. It's been discredited in England by a number of major newspapers. This is a radical cleric that had nothing to do with mainstream Islam. He was just trying to get people angry on a video. This one, there are no Muslims here. These are both Dutch kids. And they kind of go through a fake fight while he's on crutches to look like a real conflict. And in this one, again, it's a very old story of a Muslim punishing a person for some kind of offense that he did. In other words, none of these have anything to do with breaking news or current news. They were deliberately designed to mislead. Jada Franson was discredited. So he had retweeted these videos, and around 44 million followers. God bless you, Trump. God bless America, said Franson, the person that produced the fake videos. So those are two just in the last 14 days or less. Kind of interesting that would happen. Okay, fake news is not new. This is a quote from a newspaper in 1807. If, however, he should appear and not forfeit his recognizance, the writer has been guilty of spreading false news. Contrary to law, no rational man can doubt. So there's been fake news for a while. It's not new. What's new? The World Wide Web. The ability for these things to be virally transmitted to millions of people in a very short time before, if they are fake, they can really be discredited. And that's what's new. In those days, the media was the newspaper. How does fake news spread? How does fake news spread? Am I on the right path? No. I wanted to show you another kind of thing. This is really, really disobeying me here tonight. Oh, boy. It's way off. Oh, man. All right. I need some help again. Jesus. Technology. And I'm an expert in media, right? It's hard though. Each place is a little different. So those are two stories. And fake news is not new. It's really old. But how does fake news spread? A few years ago, I read a book it didn't get a lot of popular acclaim, but it was by a fellow named Douglas Rushkoff, himself a lifelong student of media, and he titled it Media Virus. And the case that he made is that sometimes something called a meme, a phrase, an idea, a notion, goes into the data sphere, which is all the information that's on the web and flying all around, and it acts like a real virus. It attacks a host, attaches itself, and begins to spread like a virus does. So he was talking to at the time he was writing it, there were memes on The Simpsons and talk shows. But in a show called L.A. Law, which I remember, it was a very popular show, he put in one, the writer put a Rodney King type episode right in the middle of the drama. It was very effective. It spread and made more attention to the real King case just because it was on the show. So some of the memes I was thinking of there recently are passive aggressive. I hear a lot of people using that term. It's psychologically fairly meaningless. It means somebody that says something negative, but they say it in a nice way, I think. That's what people are trying to establish. But one percenter, think about that one as a meme. One percenters, they're the people who live in places like, I don't know, Simsbury, West Hartford, the communities that we live in, but the people that manage to pay no taxes. So it spreads through media just like a virus from host to host. And I think it has a lot of bearing on how fake news operates or fake news works. New York Times, during the election, published a story. Did not publish a story. They exposed this for what it was, but it was after the fact. A fellow that owned a business in Austin, Texas, operated on a rumor kind of campaign that was going around that Hillary Clinton was faking demonstrations, anti-Trump demonstrations, by busing people into Austin. That was in the air. It wasn't true, by the way, but it was something that people were talking about. One fellow who owned a business took a photo of a bus with people getting out of it, and he said, the protesters are here now. And so no truth to it at all, but people began to spread it, and in just a real short time, 307,000 people shared the link that they found the buses, dozens lined up, just blocks away from the Austin protests. So anti-Trump protesters in Austin today are not as organic as they seem. And then a website called the Gateway Pundit put it up on their web, and again, now we're almost to 1 million views, and this is within 2 days, which is, unbelievable in terms of how fast it could spread. And then at last, we have, guess who's busing all those anti-Trump protesters? A publication called The Right Wing News. So it's not that people are gullible, it's that fake news operates a lot of times on things that we'd like to believe, and it confirms our particular biases and our own kind of interests, and then we begin to see it as something true. What damage can fake news do? And I'm talking about to our government, to our democracy, that stuff. There was a story in April, just this April, on a radio show adored by President Trump called InfoWars. And the gas attack on the Syrian rebels, who are our friends, they're the people that we supported, as opposed to the government of Assad, said it was the white helmets that did it. The white helmets did the gas attack, perpetrated it, and engineered it. Problem is, the white helmets are the equivalent of the Syrian Red Cross. They help people. That's their whole mission. They help people who are injured by attacks on the rebels. And he said the White Helmets, an al-Qaeda-affiliated group funded by George Soros, and the British government have reportedly staged another chemical weapon attack on civilians in the Syrian city of Khan Sheikhan. It does damage because it makes it look like our friends are our enemies. And people's public opinion begins to shift away from the rebels that we had been, before all this, been supporting. So that's some damage. Mike Cernovich is the guy who started the rumor, and it was repeated by Kellyanne Conway, you know who she is, that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring out of a Washington pizzeria, which inspired a believer to shoot up the place a month later. You remember the story? It inspired and instigated someone to violence. So fake news is not lame or weak. It's got a lot of power to do damage, I think. From the British Prime Minister, the spokesperson for Miss May, James Slack, condemns Trump's retweet of the stories about the Muslims. He added the Francis group seeks to divide communities and is the antithesis of the values this country represents. British people, our allies, are thinking that, oh my gosh, this is what's going on here. There's lots of enmity in spreading things. What I think is the most damaging is the damage to the credibility of news. Already it's been eroding. The Pew Research Center has been doing surveys for at least 3 decades on what do people trust as their sources and do they trust the media. And there's been a really profound, pronounced erosion in trust. So local news organizations, 22% of people say that they trust most of the stories from there. In other words, that's only 1 in 5 Americans who trust the local news. National news organizations, 18%. It's even lower. And family, friends, and acquaintances are 14%. Social media, well, I think it's healthy to think that they're not believing everything they read on social media. The Pew organization is probably the best one I know in terms of actually documenting what the public opinion is about media things. They do a study every year of the public's opinions of stuff. People believe fake news, and they like fake news. Students, here we go. Recent research at Stanford University, an 18-month study, looked at how do university students, undergrads, and these are Stanford people, we ought to be able to think that they're pretty smart. They said it was appalling how little they were able to judge and how low their critical faculties were. University students had to evaluate an article, determine the truth of the claim, strengths and weaknesses of a video. They just couldn't do it very well. Only a minority did, and they had to be labeled. Middle school and high school college students were asked to evaluate information presented in tweets. Hundreds of middle schoolers showed a Slate homepage that included a traditional and a native ad. In other words, an ad that people pay for to be placed in the paper. Parade story, more than 80% of them believe the sponsored content was a real news story. So our undergraduates in a very, premier institution are having difficulty telling truth from reality in the environments that they're growing up in. This is one of my favorites, though. Students were told, and these were both university and high school students, that this is a picture of flowers that were growing near a nuclear test site, and that these flowers had mutated into these, what would you call them, bent daisies, and they were asked questions of, is this real? Do you believe this? And most of them said, oh yeah, there's the picture. In other words, they didn't look, there was no labeling here. It just said, this is a site, a nuclear site. I doubt if there's any flowers growing in most of that kind of soil anyway. But they believed it without checking. And if there's anything we can do to stop the spread of fake news, it's to make everyone more media literate, to be suspicious, to ask for sources, to document those sources, and to be more critical. And I think that's a real telling kind of study. So what can we do about it? How do we fix this problem? What can we do about detecting fake news? There's a lot of help in the environment. Pay attention to the domains and the URLs of websites. abc.com is a legitimate website for news. abc.com.co is a fake site. So looking for a URL after the URL that you recognize is a dead giveaway. And in fact, what that is, CO is the URL for Colombia, the country of Colombia. And the Colombians don't have quite the monitoring of media that we do. They just took the site down. It's been up for about a year. So that's an issue that we need to pay attention to. Watch out for LO in quotes, like news low. That says satire, possibly. It's a satirical kind of thing. Snopes.com. It's been around for about 20 years, and it's a very good website for investigating urban legends. So if you hear the urban legend, one of them I used to hear in the 90s was someone bought a cactus, and one day it started to jiggle, and then it kind of burst, and little baby spiders crawled all over the house. That was spread. I've heard that from a couple of people at the time. You go to Snopes.com, and it will show the most recent legends, and that they're fake or they're real or they half-truths. But lately, in the last few years, it's become a site that tries to detect fake news and expose it. It's a very reliable site. I use it all the time. People tell me things. Sometimes I'll go quietly away and say, okay, and then check it. There's no reason to insult your friends when they repeat fake news. PolitiFact.com. Do you know that one? That brands politicians as truth or sort of truth or pants on fire. And that's when they can verify that it's a real mistruth, a dead lie. And it's a great site, too. PolitiFacts and FactCheck.org, both of those are great sites. When you're at a website, read the About Us section. Is there any information in there about people? There should be. It should be the staff of whatever organization runs the website with some names there that you can check, that you can go and see, are these people legitimately, at least on the web, who they say they are? And that's a handy one. In the About Us section. Are there quotes in the story? Can you imagine a news story with no quotes? I give about a C- for stories like that, even if they're fairly well crafted. If they have no source, people are already suspicious. So check them out. Again, if you put quotation marks around any word or phrase, you can see where it is if it's ever existed on the web. Some of us used it before there were more sophisticated programs to see if our students had cribbed and copied stuff. We used that method. And we used to bust some, too. There's a reverse image search on a lot of photos. If you right-click the image, it'll actually give you the source. Check the comments. What are the comments saying? If they're all negative under the assertions in the article, that tips you off that somebody says they're not true. And I think that's the most important thing, is to operate with a skeptical mindset. Looking at this thing, anyone can put anything on the web, as you know. But there are some ways to check it. Open source. Open source is probably a librarian. People know about all those things. A lot of educators are using it these days, where there are things about how to detect, for example, fake news. On any topic, there's something in open source material. But it's where authors have come in who can be identified, and they talk about the issues that you're curious about. And it's a great site. Bulletin board resource document. This one is by Kotsoukas, a name that keeps popping up. But here's something that's kind of unique to them. This computer's cooking now. We're in business. So they give a lot of information about fake news, but what they also do is they categorize sites for you. It's like an encyclopedia of websites, and they say, exaggeration? Well, here's some of their tips. They're great. News low, that kind of thing. I mentioned that. And again, the common websites in Columbia. If the website you're reading encourages you to dox individuals, it's unlikely to be a legitimate source of news. Sources like the Huffington Post and Fox News give sometimes very legitimate, important news, but sometimes they have guests who are on there who are not members of their staff. And again, you can check out what they say. But here is their compendium that I find most useful. And this is what they mean by, here you go. So here's a site. They're alphabetized. It's a conspiracy. It's fake. It's unreliable. It's rumor or satire. And some of them hate, okay? Act for America News. Clickbait. Clickbait, do you know that term? Some of you, it means that there may be truth in the article, but the headline has been sensationalized to make you want to go deeper into the story and read it. So it'll be maybe a not so exciting story with an exciting headline. But this is a wonderful site, I think, for people that are looking for how to detect fake news. And it's got about every one that's current right now. But as you know, it's really hard to keep up with these things.
One
Oh, yeah, I can give you the URL for it. It's just called opensource.com. Yep. And if you hit fake news when you get there, their search engine would take you right there. And I'll be happy to provide a copy of all this material to any of you that want it. I'll explain to you how to find me. But it's a great site for skeptics, people like us. There's a new technology, though, that is frightening in its scope. And it's a technology that may enable people to create fake videos that are absolutely undetectable down to the very pixel level. In other words, the FBI, police, anybody can't find it. It's called Generative Adversarial Network, and it's an artificial intelligence application that basically takes a story or a video, any kind of video, and it sets up a generative network. In other words, a network that has some misinformation possibly in it, or anything you want to put in it. There's another network that tries to correct the generative network, and it looks for errors and puts in what would probably be the truth from the video. And then what you have in the end is something that no one can detect as fake news. I'll show you an example. There was a singer in the 1990s. What was his name? Rick. This guy, Rick Astley, a British guy. And someone wanted to create a story in a music magazine that Astley, he hasn't been popular for a long time, had taken his original song and modified it so that he sang it in order of pitch. Low notes at the beginning, high notes at the beginning to low notes at the end, and rearranged the song in a video. And people said, well, that's weird. Why would he do that? And it drove people crazy at first. I wouldn't play the whole thing. It's annoying. When the generative network operates on it, it says this is genuine, and even down to the very, like I said, pixel level, nobody can tell it's fake. He just did it on a musical kind of composition because he wanted to show that he could make something look jerky and erratic like no one would really do, but other people would say, who are examining this, would say, well, that's real. The frightening implication to me is that any fake news video story could be constructed using this technology. And it's right now kind of new, time-consuming, expensive, but it's another application of artificial intelligence that a lot of people are worried about. So, this topic is immense to me because we're not going to see the end of fake news for a while. It's going to multiply. And what I'd like to do is see mandatory media education in schools. We're the only English-speaking nation that doesn't have a lesson plan through all the primary grades and up through high school in media and how they work. Because we do for reading, we do for other sources of information, but we don't do it for media literacy. Australia, the United Kingdom, all these countries have this instruction built into school, and kids have to do things like, well, what if you were going to make a newscast? What would you do? What would you say? And get people to kind of internalize the lessons involved in portraying real news. But now I'd like to hear from you folks, some of your comments, because you've been kind enough to listen to me for a whole hour. Yeah, hi.
Good question. That may or may not apply. I'm hearing a lot about net neutrality.
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand it, other than it's a little scary to me. And I'm wondering what the effect will have on this.
Wow. Well, someone that wants... Is everyone familiar with the net neutrality issue? It's in the news right now. That basically an evil Comcast company could set up a fast path to the internet that's a lot quicker than other paths. If their competition offers the programming on their channels, they could bias the presentation in favor of their programming and slow down the other one. And essentially make the internet what is now a frontier, would render that frontier into kind of a capitalist shopping center. And that people with money would get better service and people with not as much money would get poorer service. So I'm thinking that's a really interesting connection. I've never connected them. But I'm thinking that it's going to multiply the channels of information for sure. There's going to be a lot more channels. And I think it would be another avenue to spread fake news if it was to your advantage. But then again, some of these are, Facebook, for example, has got a major effort underway to try to prevent any more fake news on their medium. It's going to be really hard. But that's a really interesting thing to think about. It's really good. She was a professor at my university. Yeah, that's good skepticism. But do you agree with me on the potential for damage of this stuff? Evildoers pouring stories into media? And if you read something in the National Enquirer, any of those newspapers in the checkout line at the grocery store, you already know that they're probably not true, but they are entertaining. One just went out of business, News of the World. That was the one that had Elvis seen in shopping centers, and he was big and fat. And it had Martians in almost every issue, bad pictures of aliens. That stuff's not a problem. The Onion, that's not fake news, that's satire. And I think intelligent people can tell the difference. But when we start being able to actually mess with the digital aspects of a video presentation, that presents us with a really frightening scenario. Sir?
Is there a distinction between propaganda and fake news?
I think fake news is propaganda because it's always in one direction. It's not just to confuse for the sake of a prank. Like I say, it's meant to deceive. So I think it's propaganda in new clothes. Think of the things you saw in World War II, the posters, the World War I, print materials. Still fairly harmless because they weren't transmitted instantly to everybody before they had time to think about them. So I think that's a strong relationship, yeah. But suddenly, there's so many fake stories in the news lately. Maybe the further we get away from the last election, maybe it'll ease up, but I don't know. Yes, ma'am. Joe.
What do you think we would have to do to get it into the schools so children and teens and college students can start to figure out that this is a problem and what they can do about it?
Well, I think teachers who build curriculum have to start making time, and it's hard it's easy for a professor to say, yeah, put this in your curriculum. It's a difficult job teaching. But I think promoting curricula, maybe even emulating some of the British models, and the New Zealand has tremendous programs in media literacy. I think just talking to the people who are decision makers in schools would help a lot. There's a school in Manchester, Connecticut. What's it called? It's a private school, an academy that's all media. And that's a good example. For instance, history, they teach through historical video and film, and then they discuss it kind of stuff. But when they focus on a lot of media, Odyssey School. I should remember the name. It was on the board in its early days. I think it's now in its 12th or 13th year. It's a good model to look at, and they invite people to come in and see what they're doing all the time. Odyssey School, it's middle of Manchester. But I think we need some more publicity of stuff like that. Yeah, there are a lot of people who've been trying to do this, and it's a very difficult thing. A lot of people say, what do we need this media junk for? We need more math education or something like that. But yeah, I think it's an effort.
Librarians could,
yes,
could do it.
They sure could. Librarians kind of led the movement in some of these countries to begin these curricula. They were right there in the front line. And who else but a librarian is equipped to do that? It's a wonderful thing, I think. Wonderful mission to be on. Yes, ma'am.
You suggested, given us several different sites we can go to check and see if something is actually fake.
Right.
I think you're probably singing to the choir here. What about the people who are firmly convinced that everything is a conspiracy? I mean, how would you change that?
Oh, man.
That's frightening to me.
Fighting ignorance is what you're talking about. Oh, yeah. It's difficult. There's, you get in shouting matches with people, and they take their defensive position and kind of dig in. I don't spend a lot of time arguing with folks like that.
But they have no reason to go and fact check, because they already know what the facts are.
Oh, I know. A person I work with, her husband listens to Rush Limbaugh all day in the car. He's in a construction business, and he comes home and tells her things, and she comes up with the most outlandish stories. And it's just unbelievable. And it's, the Rush Limbaugh kind of thing, where there's never evidence. It's the same cycle over and over again, name calling. He's an enemy of Hillary Clinton one week, an enemy of somebody else the next week. I don't know. I think we have to live with it and try to educate people as much as we can. There's a lot of conspiracy. Do you encounter that in your life, other folks?
Friends, because we tend to choose friends.
Right.
But even some members of our family, I just...
Make a dismal Thanksgiving, right?
Well, at Christmas, with the holidays coming up.
Add alcohol to the equation, and it's real trouble. Yeah, you can get families hating each other in a very short time. So I try not to argue against it, because usually the evidence is clear to them. It's really hard. But yeah, preaching to the choir is exactly right. Simsbury, sir.
Well, you just used the word a moment ago. Their evidence. In other words, if you ask them, and somewhat impolitely, what's your evidence, they'll quote something.
Yes.
Which may in itself be true or not true.
Right.
And now you've got conflicting evidence.
And you're in a data war, that's right. Yeah, you can't win those, I don't think.
But how do you move forward from that in order to get some kind of agree to disagree or agree to agree?
Work with the children. They're going to be adults someday. I think that's the only answer. I don't know how to convert Archie Bunker into Meathead. I wish I did, or vice versa. Because he was irrational a lot of the time. That was a wonderful show, yeah.
See, one of your slides had a line that Trump listens to or believes people who lie.
That's right, a radio show.
That's a circular argument, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. I mean, he supports and retweets things that other legitimate sources can prove were simply not true. That those Islam videos were modern-day Muslims attacking things. It's just the world of rational people know that that's not true, and they know the woman who's hated in England and famous for spreading stuff like that around. She's an anti-Muslim patriot. She's trying to get every one of them out of the country, which if you've been to London lately, good luck, right? They're there. Yes?
I know that freedom of speech is basically a very good thing, but are there any current laws in place that would help to hold people accountable that spread purposely false news?
No. None that I know of. No law. Did you read about the incident at UConn last week? The guy who came and what was his speech about? What's wrong with white people? It's okay to be white. That guy, he was not doing anything illegal, and now the charges against him were dropped this morning, and they're bringing the woman to trial who stole his script. So it's kind of interesting. She's trying to be a crusader, and there's no law to protect her. But the way First Amendment works, it's really hard to ban one class of speech and preserve the other one. Hate speech that is incendiary and drives people. If I told you, go out and kill those folks, that's illegal. But that's about it. As one justice said, yelling fire in a crowded theater. That's the kind of speech that's banned. But anything short of that, anything goes. It's getting weird in the media lately. And the channels keep coming, more and more things, more content. It's a very difficult time it's a good time to be a student of communication, but a very difficult time to do anything as a citizens group. Keep yourself informed. Hi. Yes, ma'am.
It just popped into my head. Mark Twain wrote fake news.
He did write fake news, but was it satire, though? And if it's satire...
Explosions that hadn't happened.
When he was a journalist, you mean? Yeah. I don't know a lot about his journalistic career. I read the novels, and the fiction. But I knew he was a reporter, and he was in California in the gold country for a while. But he was doing fake news. Why did he do that?
He had to fill the newspaper with something.
He was bored, maybe. He was a guy who was easily bored, I think, and loved a story. And maybe some of those stories are what turned into the ones we love so much. As a journalist, you can't say anything bad about Mark Twain in Connecticut.
Well,
He's holy.
He did do some damage, though, to
He
Native
did?
Americans with some of the stuff that he wrote.
Oh, I don't know much about that, really. So he wrote anti-Native American stories? Oh, man, that's not very nice. Well, if you scratch the surface of Mark Twain, I know you find a lot of stuff that you may not like, I think. Yes?
This isn't really about fake news, but more about how biased the media is.
Uh-huh.
What would you say which media sources are the most unbiased?
Well, what do I listen to and watch and stuff like that? I'm an NPR junkie.
Well, I am too, but
They got a leftist bias.
a little biased.
Oh, they are leftist bias all the time.
Right, but is there anything that's not biased?
No. Because what you're asking, is there anything that's not done by humans? And I think we carry the flavor of bias within us. With students, I'm always trying to say fairness. Fairness means not this viewpoint and the other viewpoint, but a bunch of viewpoints. And they have a lot of trouble with it. Well, I got the guy who was for gun control, and I got the guy that was against it. Isn't that enough? No, it's not enough. There's rational people that can own guns and want to negotiate. There's crazies. And then there's people that want to ban everything and no hunting or any of that kind of stuff. Get those people, get those voices. But yeah, I think a steady diet of, just like they're always teaching us about the nutrition pyramid, eat a lot of different vegetables. You consume a lot of different sources. I read Time magazine. The bias I'm seeing in that is more like towards entertainment. They're trying to, the hard news that I used to get out of it 10 years ago, I'm not getting anymore. I'm getting more entertainment news, news of famous celebrities. The Huffington Post is a really interesting website because it has some of that junk, celebrity news, but the stuff that it has about world politics is excellent. And if it doesn't, the woman that owns it, if it doesn't come from her, she will go out and find it and hire somebody to get a good story. I like that one, but I like reading 5, 6, 7 things, to balance them out. It's easier in some countries. In some countries, when there's 6 newspapers and you know what party, there's 6 political parties, each one is, you kind of get a balance of what the news is like. In Canada, the CN, what is their equivalent of the PBS, CN, the government station. If there's an airplane crash, there's always a conservative on the panel who says, well, this is what regulation really did to cause that crash. And then you get a liberal that say, no, it's a factor of deregulation. Somebody else says, well, we're trying to sell too many flights in too short a time. You get a balance there. The problem is they only do 4 or 5 stories in an hour news. But it's really interesting because everyone is kind of obvious about what their bias is. And I think that's where probably truth, if there is anything like it, lies. Yes, sir.
You indicated that the basic premises of the fake news is, number one, that it's a lie and that it's causing damages. And it seems to me that's starting to approach the realm of slander. And you can sue people for slander and libel and things like that. And I'm just wondering why maybe that hasn't reared its ugly head a little bit more as the fake news seems to have exploded, because a lot of the fake news is directed at an individual as opposed to a group or a larger audience.
But remember, if about a famous person, the conditions for a libel decision on the part of a judge is that not only did you publish something false, knew it was false, and also that it would do damage to the person, and that you knew that prior to publication. You have to prove that with a public figure. And most of these people are public figures. For you and I, it's much easier to to get a liable decision. Did the person have evidence that this was true or not, and did they set out to do this? But not this, what do they call it, malice aforethought. The idea that we're cooking up this story to hurt this person. It's really hard to get a decision anymore. And slander is, spoken libel. I haven't seen a case about that in a long time that worked, it resulted in a conviction. One of my colleagues specializes in media law, and he studies a lot about things like that, and says it's very hard. Again, the First Amendment is dominant for that. For living in a democracy, we do give up some things. One of them is the ability to punish the people we don't like. Sir?
Well, I want to thank you for the sources that you gave us.
I'll send them to you if you request.
I remember a discussion I had with an associate of mine, and she was recounting some obviously incorrect piece of news. And so I told her that, that news came up on the TV the other day, and the reporter confronted the person that was expressing that thought and told him, as a politician, that this has already been debunked. It's obviously for it. And this was a senator, I'm pretty sure, and he said his reply to her was, well, it was widely reported. What else is there? That's all we have.
Right, it was widely reported.
It was widely reported.
What's her name? The President Trump's spokesperson, the woman, Huckabee. She said about those videos, it doesn't matter if they're genuine as we express they were at all. It's really the feeling, the sentiment that we're trying to get out. In other words, hate and exclusion of people. Yeah, that's wonderful, though, when you can catch somebody in a complete, lie who's spoken from a public office. It would be nice if all our public officers behaved like what they're supposed to. Yes, Sam.
So, in a political campaign, what would prevent somebody from completely fabricating events that never happened?
Oh, exactly. But what we have is people like Washington Post, dedicated journalists who are out to poke and find the truth and look under rocks. And it's really all we have. I tell my students a story. I'm from California, but there was a town, Bell, California. It's about 40 miles from Los Angeles. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's primarily a Hispanic town, population about 40,000, median income's about, today, $19,000 per year. And this was, we're talking now about 2005. The mayor of the town was making $300,000 a year, and all the city councilmen were being paid $100,000 for a part-time job, like city councilman usually is. A parking ticket there was $200 for parking in a time zone. It was operating just like that. 2 reporters from the Los Angeles Times heard a rumor. They went there. There was no newspaper or television station in the town. They really couldn't support it with that kind of community. They went there, and within 6 months, most of those people were in prison or paying a huge fine or on probation. So, journalism doesn't cure everything, but it's all we have sometimes as a defense against lies, fake news, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming out on this miserable night, and thank you for the wise and insightful comments. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.